Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Taking the good with the ups and downs.
Okay, good morning councillors and good morning officers to our Infrastructure Committee meeting for the 4th of April 2023. I'd like to begin with acknowledgement, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet today, the Darumbal people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to extend that respect to our neighbouring Aboriginal peoples within our local government area, the Gungaloo Nation people, the Barada, Cabelbarra and Yetamarala people, also acknowledging the Torres Strait Islander peoples whose land are in the Torres Straits but who live and work in Aboriginal land. Thank you, Councillor. We have a full complement of councillors this morning. Could we move on to the confirmation of the previous minutes of the 7th of March 2023 be confirmed as true and accurate record? Could I have a mover? Move Councillor Smith, seconded Councillor Wickerson. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried. Unanimously, Councillor Fisher, the minutes? Yeah. Computer just died. Okay, we might just pause for a second while we'll try and sort that. We'll move on to declarations in matters on the agenda. Councillors, we do have a madam there, Councillor Smith. Would you like to walk us through that one, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a prescribed conflict of interest in 10.1, talking about the project delivery capital project report, March 2023, Mount Morgan Water Supply Pipeline Project. And this prescribed conflict arises as my nephew Adam McAvoy is a partner in MTC, which has a contract with Fitzroy River Water to cart potable drinking water to Mount Morgan. My brother John McAvoy is employed by MTC to drive the water tanker. And in relation to the proposed water pipeline, the alignment goes along Cabra Road, where my brother owns a property at 248 Cabra Road, and also goes along Moomura Road, where my sister and brother-in-law Don and Trish McKinnon own a property on the corner of Moomura and Poison Creek Roads. I will deal with the conflict by leaving the room and staying away from the place where the meeting is being held when this matter is being discussed and voted on.
Thanks very much, Councillor Smith. Councillor Latcham.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just questioning the walking and cycling strategy pathway hierarchy and prioritisation covers pretty much everyone in the whole area. Do any of us have a conflict in it?
Defer to the CEO just on that one,
As long as councillors stay at the policy level and not down into the detail of each of the projects, that should be fine. As long as it stays at that policy framework level.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Latcham. Councillor Rutherford?
Mr Mayor, 10.4, the Parkhurst Road strategy, is very close to my
your property?
residence and close to my sister's residence. I don't believe I have a conflict, but would like to put it to the table.
Okay, we might grab the details of that, and just to be acknowledged there, Councillor Rutherford, so could we grab that detail? And again, that brings Councillor Mather into that one as well, Mather,
Yeah,
into that one as well. So we might give that detail to Linda, so then we can have a vote on it. So
May do Councillor Kirkland as well.
did Councillor Kirkland have one?
It's a fair way from Edinburgh.
So, Linda, my residence is in Samuel Crescent. Samuel Crescent, yep.
That's right.
So-
I think we might try to, Evan, just grab, because there's a number of people that have all got their properties close to that item, we might just have to deal with them individually, and we'll vote individually on them, but then can we get the detail to Linda, or we do that as we work? Okay. Well, we'll deal with Councillor Rutherford first, then Councillor Mathers, and then Councillor Wickerson and Councillor Kirkland then as well, just to put it to the table.
So yes, and my sister and brother-in-law, I have to give their names, don't I? Yeah. Judy and Gordon Oxenham. OXEN, yeah. Also reside in close proximity.
And Councillor...
Is that enough, Mr CEO?
Would they be identified with any of those outcomes in that strategy, like high surface, roads, or infrastructure identified with strategy, council?
If I am, they are, Mr CEO. Yeah. What's their
It'd have to be 3 kilometres away, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so I'm putting it there, address, so I've got Senator President.
It'd have to be 3 kilometres.
Well, I thought, because this was the thing, I thought we could always just say, rather than give family members private details, that we could just say in close proximity. This is what we discussed at the...
If the discussion can start at high level, not down to the individual, you will be fine with that. It's a bit like the pathways, cyclists, pathways as well. You keep that at policy level. Do you see anything in that policy level that would have an impact on yourself or your sister and brother-in-law?
If you think there's even the slightest issue, I'm happy to step out.
Can I just...
Or just put it to the table to explain the report. Yeah,
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but this report is just seeking and making, well, 2 things. There's an overall strategy, and that strategy is about defining the major road infrastructure in that area and when it will be required in the future years. And what this is doing is saying it's a few years, it's approaching. We're giving you warning that these roads this road network will be starting to be constructed or required, and we will commence the design process.
And that's how I read
So
it.
that's
That's
what
why
we-
I didn't think that
Yeah.
there was a close enough connection. But if the,
Yeah, I don't
if
think
the
there
table
is.
believes or you believe it's
Not letting it get down to this is where it needs to move and that's where it's
Yeah,
got to
we're not going to
go.
be talking about the detailed design because it's not
No.
design, it's a concept.
I think it's far enough removed as it's at the high level. I think if it comes to the next part, and this is where we're,
When we actually get down into the details.
yeah, down into the dirt. Yeah. Okay.
Pretty confident.
Right, councillors will.
So do we still need to vote? No? No vote?
You can put it to the vote, and it's to keep it very, very open and honest, but it's going to become a bit messy because you're on the same boat here, you're on the same boat as well. I mean, last time when we got, this got one up, Taylor said you could stay, you had to go to the direct relationship, or that what you decide to let them. Yeah, I honestly don't believe this, I don't believe it.
Okay. On the CEO's advice, he believes that it's at that high level. Unless we get into the the discussion around the project, at that point, then we'll need to raise it there. So, on that advice, I'd suggest we just deal with the motor, and then if it gets into the detail, we can speak about it at that point. I can. And Councillor Kirkland.
And Councillor Kirkland, that they all raised a concern, and we were on the advice of working way through it. If it was too far removed, create conflict of interest as long as you stayed at that high level. So we'll note in the minutes so that you've actually identified
Raised
yourself. But we'll note in the minutes that it's a fairly far removed.
Can I just ask the question, if they're driving on that road every day, is that still considered to be far removed? Because we all drive on every road, all of us drive on roads that are impacted by these things, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Right. Thanks very much, Evan, and thank you, councillors, for bringing that to our attention. It will be captured and something there that we can refer to in a later date. But if we do get into the nuts and bolts of it, then we can raise that at the time of the discussion. Right, councillors, moving on to item 10.1, the Project Delivery Capital Projects Report. Understanding Councillor Smith has a conflict with the Mount Morgan Water and Transport and Pipeline Project, so if we can leave that... Sorry?
You missed one.
Oh, sorry.
Lifting.
Oh, lifting matters from the table, 6.1. Sorry, councillors. It's, I'll have a move in a second. I'm happy to move that we took lift the matter of the Quay Street traffic configuration. Happy to move, seconded by Deputy Mayor Councillor Fisher. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Now we move on to item 10.1. Again, understanding Councillor Smith has a conflict with the Mount Morgan Water Pipeline Project and carting. So we'll deal with the other items, councillors, and if we leave that one till the last, we can deal with that separately, subject to any questions on that project.
Mayor, I'm not going to run through the individual projects. Andrew's away today, so I'm just happy to take questions, and if on any of the projects, the most recent thing would be we've just kicked off the Mount Morgan Pool project, but the rest are progressing, and it's highlighted in the report, so I'm not going to draw attention to any of them.
Okay, we'll go for questions from the table and then we'll deal with that, but councillors, just be mindful of Councillor Smith's conflict in this one. Okay, Councillor Archam, then Councillor Wickerson. Councillor Archam.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you through to Peter. Just one item on there, very conscious of everyone's conflicts. The hail damage insurance claims. Quite many years ago this started. Do we have much left in the pipeline to complete, or at what point does it expire and they can't claim it?
Well, for us, we did get a settlement, and it's just a bulk of a whole series of buildings, and we are just about near the end of that project. So probably another month or so, and this project will come off the list as done. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Archam. Councillor Wickerson.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of comments by way of thanks. I think the first one is the Gracemere car park related to the SES facility. I know it's to start imminently, but as well as the obvious benefit of it, it's going to feed into the CBD at Gracemere. So I think those folk there, it's only about less than 50 metres, maybe pathway down to it. So it's, I don't know what the number of car parks, Peter, but considerable number.
Yeah, I can't recall. No.
Might be 50 or something like that. So that'll help the folk there. I know they've been suffering through the roadworks that have been ongoing. And the second one that's not on the list, but it's close to the Athelstane Reservoir, I'd like to thank Peter and your crew for the Meter Street formalisation of that lookout up there. Only a small project, but hopefully, fingers crossed, it's going to have a big impact on the antisocial behaviour that happens in that area. So we'll monitor that and see how it travels. So I know the residents up there are hugely grateful, and yeah, as am I.
That's good. Positive feedback, Councillor. So we like to pass on that message as well. So if you can acknowledge that, Peter, that'd be fantastic to the staff for their work in that space. Councillor, if there's no further questions to Peter's report, I'll happy to seek a mover in a second. With that, Councillor Smith, would you like to move? Seek a seconder. Councillor Wickerson, put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Brings us on to 10.2, the response to petition. The pipeline one?
No?
Just do the law one, yeah.
If there's no questions,
There are no questions on that, Councillor Smith, so we avoided that one. Moving on to 10.2, the response to petition, accessible parking. Peter, would you, or Martin, or Stu? Sorry, Stu.
Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. In October last year, Council received a petition that was tabled regarding the placement and location of disability parking spaces, with particular respect to rear-loading vehicles. The petition stated that majority of disabled parking bays were not designed to accommodate rear-loading vehicles, and drivers were undertaking loading practices either within the road or by straddling two parking spaces or parking on an angle different to the bays that were provided. Officers made contact with the lead petitioner at the beginning of this year to understand further the matters raised within that petition. And predominantly the issues are that with the advent of NDIS, there's a lot more money around for people to privately modify their vehicles to carry disabled patrons. So previously they predominantly used taxi services, but with NDIS there's now an ability to modify existing vehicles, and the rear-loading modifications are the preferred in terms of cost and usable space within that vehicle. So there's a lot more of those types of activities happening, and they're not limited to cab ranks now. They're now using existing disabled bays. In most instances, rear loading is used by those particular users, and they're able to load and unload it using the footpath where they reverse up to the back of curb. But the predominant issue that the lead petitioner raised was with respect to existing parallel disabled bays. So that's essentially been the focus of this report, is looking at those and how they are compliant or non-compliant. So officers took a review of the disabled bays within the CBD and within at a desktop level at Gracemere and Mount Morgan, and looked at the disabled bays that were there and which ones were parallel and whether they were compliant or not. So broadly speaking, there's about 49. There's a bit of an error in the report. It says 48. There was one that was put in not so long ago. So there's 49 accessible parking bays within the CBD area in Rockhampton, 2 in Mount Morgan and 1 in Gracemere and Laurie Street. This represents about 1.65% of the total number of parking spaces available. The new Australian standard indicates that there's a recommendation now that 2% is preferred, so we're fairly close to that. And I suppose there's another body of work to look and see whether there's areas where we're missing or lacking those bays. Of the accessible parking bays within the Rockhampton CBD, 8 are the parallel spaces, 8 are in off-street parking facilities that are council managed, such as City Hall and a few other, Pilbeam Theatre. And 10 are centre aisle parking and the rest are rear angled parking. So Up in Gracemere and Mount Morgan, Laurie Street has one rear entry bay, and Mount Morgan has 2 parallel bays that are up there in Morgan Street. So the Australian standard for on-street parking for accessible parking bays has recently changed. So previously the standard was 1993. There was an update in late 2020, and it's provided a bit more guidance and information around accessible parking bays. So as I said before, with rear entry bays, the understanding is that they utilise the footpath to load and unload rather than the carriageway. For centre aisle parking, it's not possible to extend the bays to facilitate that rear loading because they'll be out in either side of the carriageway doing those manoeuvres. Whilst they're compliant under the Australian standard, they're not suitable, I suppose, for the use for rear loading vehicles. When it comes to parallel spaces, we did an assessment of the 9 spaces identified with regards to the current standards. So the existing spaces would have been compliant under the former standard, under 1993. However, there's been a change where they've lengthened the requirements of the bay, and that's predominantly to facilitate rear loading disabled vehicles. So we've got 9 within the CBD. 3 of those are already compliant. They meet the requirements for width and length, and there are 5 spaces that aren't compliant, and they'll either require the removal of an adjacent parking bay, and some may require construction of additional curb ramp. The 2 spaces in Mount Morgan are compliant under the new standards. So the table in the report indicates where those spaces are and whether they are or aren't compliant. There's 2 that are in East Street there outside the old post office. They can probably, so to facilitate them being the required length, there'll be a need to remove a parking space for nearly all of the spaces identified here, except for the 2 in East Street because they're adjacent to each other, so it'll only require the removal of 1. But that'll give us the extra length that's required for those rear lighting vehicles. So it's officer's recommendation to retrofit those existing ones to reflect the current standards and for accessible parking. Where new ones are required in the future, council will look to do rear loading because that seems to be the preference of community. But if it's required to be parallel, we'll make sure they're compliant with the 2020 standard. We also acknowledge that there's probably a smattering of disabled bays on street on the north side. They're not really focused in any particular area, but we'll go through and have a look at those in the next 12 months and sort of ensure that they're also compliant. There's a handful that we're aware of that we'll go and assess as well. So happy to take any questions from the table regarding this one.
Okay, thanks very much, Stu. We've got a number of lights on. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Fisher, and I'll go to the other councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Stuart, this is a really good report. The lead 2 people who made the approach with the petition met with myself and Councillor Rutherford while I was acting and Mayor, and it is something that we don't really realise the difficulties that they were facing accessing parking in the CBD in particular. And once they made us aware, it was sort of something that it was sort of kind of logical, but until you get that raised, you don't realise. I read the report and then sort of actually made a point of going and having a look at each of those sites, and I think you've put together a really good report, and it's probably going to make quite a bit of difference for those families there that need to use the rear loading access to their cars for wheelchairs. So I think that is really good. Going into the future, you're going to go through and have a look at sort of some of the areas. Around the schools was the other one there that I was going to raise, that we've got a number of schools that the car parks and parking is very congested already. That's one that I thought would also need to have some investigation. I was looking at Frenchville School and North Rocky in particular in my division. Both had would have some difficulties with a rear loading wheelchair access. But overall, it's a great report. And
Yeah.
Mr Mayor, I'd be happy to move that if it comes up.
Thanks, Councillor Fisher. Yeah, Stu, is that something there, further investigation around the schools, or is that
Yeah, so through the
another
chair.
stage?
Yeah, so through the chair, that they're probably the ones where on north side that we've really got to investigate. There's predominantly ones
Yeah.
in some of the schools that that are on street. And when it comes to off-street car parking, we've got little if it's privately owned or owned by the school, we've got little, I suppose, control over that. So we'll be just looking at on-street or council-maintained facilities. But yeah, that note that there's some on north side related to a few that are around schools that we put on street, making sure there's required length there. And I think the work to do those aren't significant because they've already got the width. It's just making sure they've got the required length associated with those.
Okay, thanks, Stu. Councillor Mathers, then Councillor Kirkland.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. Through you too. Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. Yeah, thank you, Stuart. The area that your team has done a fantastic job on was putting lines along High Street near, I think, Bidgety and also the medical centre there. So I just want to say thanks very much for that, and this is a great program that we're following up with. While we were taking the time to put those new car parks in, did we actually allow for any of these new accessible car parks to go into that space?
So through the chair, no, we didn't in that particular area. The standards have some wording around where you should and shouldn't, I suppose, try and put accessible parking spaces, and there's some requirements around speeds and volumes, and given High Street's fairly constrained, we just sort of left it as is, marking those bays, noting that there wasn't any time restrictions, and with the business uses there wasn't particularly, I suppose, one that jumped out for an NDIS type facility, and Bidgety and that have off-street parking on some of those businesses and High Street as well. So we're just focused in that instance and just providing and marking bays in that particular area. But if there was a demand, we could definitely look at it in that particular space. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Mr Mayor. Look, that makes sense. I know there is some off-street parking there, but also with the medical centre as well. I just know the residents were very keen to have that sorted, so thanks very much for everything that the team has done with that.
Thanks, Councillor Mathers. Councillor Kirkland.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Stuart, thank you. Great. This is wonderful, and I think congratulations to those that have made their voices heard. We can see that because of that change in NDIS funding, that people have got the capacity to use their private vehicles, and it's always been a thing really for people with walkers and wheelchairs and whatever else as to getting a park. So yeah, thank you so much for following up on this and for making it happen. Conceding we do lose a couple of car parks at the end of the day. We're helping the community and being more equitable again with that distribution of resources. Signage, I'm assuming, is going to be front and centre for people who visited the community who might be needing those accessible spaces. Will they be readily able to identify those? Is it through signage, or is there like an online app that they use to know where those parks are? I don't know. Can you answer that for me?
So through the chair, obviously there's signage associated with, there's standard signage associated with disabled and accessible parking spaces, and Council's website has the CBD parking map which shows where parking restrictions are, including some of the disabled parking spaces. But as for specifically limiting those bays for rear-loading vehicles, we wouldn't be looking to do that. It'll be available for any person that has a disability permit, but just noting, I suppose, that we're making it more able for those people that have rear-loading vehicles to park there. So it's still available for anyone with a disability permit, but that, I suppose, we're making them compliant and able to facilitate those rear-loading vehicles.
Through you, Mr Mayor. So just to clarify, if I had the need, if I'm coming to Rockhampton, a visitor to Rockhampton, and I need to know where that is, the only way for me to find out straight away to plan my journey for the day would be to go to Council's website. Is that right?
I believe there's local laws do have the CBD parking app that you can get on, and it shows where the various time restrictions and bays are. But I'd have to take that one on notice to see if it's still actively reflecting disabled bays, Councillor.
Right. Is there a way that we can communicate with the community that utilise these services so that they can have a directive to utilise that resource? I don't know.
So through Through the chair, I suppose we'll be responding to the petitioners to indicate where we've made changes to these bays.
probably-
And I suppose that information will disseminate through the community.
Yeah, that's right, they probably have that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wickerson, then Councillor Rutherford.
Yep. Thanks, Mr Mayor. Through you to Stuart. Stuart, with the couple of bays that we have to crib a bit, I think it's about 1.2 metres or so off the adjacent bay to make it comply with the 2020 standard. The balance of that bay that we've lost, is it possible to make that maybe motorbike parking so we don't lose it totally? It's still useful for something. Is that I couldn't see a map in there, but would that be something that's possible?
You must have been talking to some of the officers in my team, Councillor Wickerson. They've said the same thing, yeah. In some areas, and in the standard, it also reflects that there's an ability to utilise existing space there for motorcycle parking. It'll be a little bit on a case-by-case basis because some of the bays we may creep a bit more space and we may just shuffle things around a little bit so that it might give a little bit more clearance from a driveway or something. But where there is a space there that, will be wasted space, I suppose, we'll probably look to see whether we can provide motorcycle parking or something like that in that space. But it'll depend, I suppose, when we get into the design of it to see what can be facilitated. But we'll be looking to try and maximise parking, in that CBD area.
Yeah, motorcycles / scooters / push bikes. I mean, there'll be options there for a number of different...
motorised buggies or whatever.
Yeah.
And Mr Mayor, just a comment too, and credit to Councillor Rutherford, when we were reviewing the new William Street parking, there was, I think, was there one disabled bay in the middle, like in the centre parking, which Councillor Rutherford pointed out was a bit problematic, because if you could get out of it, then you're in traffic and where do you go? There's no ramp up, so we relocated that over to the car park adjacent to Professors, which is a bit safer to get in and out of your car, and I think it would suit rear loading as well as side. And then we were able to get an extra car park put back into that William Street centre parking. So the locals were happier, never totally happy, but and also makes it much safer for people with a disability to use their vehicles as well, or their passengers. But, good outcome.
Yep, thanks for those comments, Councillor Wickerson. Councillor Rutherford and then Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the report, Stuart. It's great. I wanted to pick up on, you said a further report to look at North Side. I wonder if you can include with that, and Councillor Fisher's schools, but any of our sporting precincts too that maybe have on-street parking, just to see whether they're covered. But also Wandle and Allenstown. I think, we certainly have disabled parking bays at Wandle that we may need to have a little look at, and I'm assuming there will be some in Allenstown precinct as well. So just, cast that net a little wider, if possible, please.
That was what I was going to say, cast that net, but it's prudent if we're looking at the north side, then taking those other areas as well, and there's no urgency on that, but when you're doing that review, to include those other areas, it's right. Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Stuart, with Gracemere, we've only got one in Laurie Street outside the medical centre. We used to have one in Russell Street as well, and I think with all the roadworks and everything that sort of went by the by, is it possible to have one in Russell Street? Because people often load from there and walk into the doctor's surgery that way. It's not very far. It's only about the third shop down. There was always one there.
Okay, Councillor, I'll take that on notice.
Because, just one for the amount of traffic and the amount of people.
Is that angle parking or parallel?
It's parallel it depends. It's parallel one side and angle the other.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Smith. Councillor, there's no further questions. Could I have Councillor Fisher's happy to move. Councillor Rutherford, would you like to second this one? Thank you. Okay, we have a mover and a seconder. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thanks, councillors. We'll move on to our next item on the agenda. 10.3, the Key Street traffic configuration, and Stu, we'll ask to present that report too, please.
Yep. So following a report in November 22, Council was approached by representatives of business owners along Key Street, seeking some further information and consultation with councillors regarding the configuration and what was being proposed in some of the content of the reports. A meeting was held in January this year with business owners, and in that a number of options were proposed around the configuration of Quay Street, and concerns were raised about some issues they are experiencing currently, particularly around volume and speed of vehicles in Quay Lane. Several of the potential options were raised to council or by council after the meeting, and they're currently being investigated by officers. The work involved in some of those are quite complex, and the impacts are on the wider network and wider stakeholders. So further time's needed for us to adequately design and model and cost those elements before we come back with a firm recommendation to council. However, it's noted that there are some concerns that the business owners had raised that I suppose require some interim action or work from council. So they're predominantly boiled down to three issues there. The speed compliance, so officers have previously mentioned that speed compliance on Quay Street itself is quite poor, predominantly due to that large carriageway, so 6 metres wide and one way. Under that temporary one-way arrangement that's there. Whilst this is had been happening on a temporary arrangement, I suppose the decision to continue to leave it as is not necessarily supported by officers. So there's a number of traffic counts that have been done on Quay Street, and they've shown that vehicles aren't driving to that shared zone speed of 20 kilometres an hour, and they're far exceeding it. And so that's not creating, the current environment doesn't create a slow speed environment to facilitate that shared zone designation that's currently there. So if the current arrangement is to remain as is, even on its temporary basis, it's officers' recommendation that the shared zone be removed and replaced with a 30 kilometre or 40 kilometre high activity transport user area zone. So these are a new type of zone that's been brought into the Australian standard, but essentially it's representing areas that have high activity of use for pedestrian areas, like this, like the mall, and reflecting that with a lower speed limit. And so officers would undertake a speed limit review, but it's probably likely that it'd be consistent with East Street at that 30 kilometres per hour. But the nature of that shared zone would fall away, so it'll just be a road at a low speed like East Street is currently.
Okay, thanks very much for that report, Stuart. It's covering off on some of the issues raised through myself and the councillors as well. So considering work being required to happen on in Quay Street in the future, it's prudent that this trial has that the ability to work through options and see how that works over the next 12 months. Got a number of lights on, so I'll go to questions from the table and then we'll go to the report. Councillor Kirkland, Councillor Rutherford, then Councillor Wickerson. Councillor Kirkland.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Stuart, this is definitely this is a trial for 12 months overall to see how everything goes?
Yeah, so through the chair, the trial, I suppose, predominantly around the works to Quay Lane, so the speed control there, and obviously the arrangement for the shared zone would be similar. If council's going to make a decision when we get to that permanent decision later, whether that's one way or two way, that can influence, I suppose, whether it remains as a shared zone or not moving forward. So yes, what's proposed here, I suppose, is in the interim until council makes a formal resolution on Quay Street.
Thank you for that clarification. My question is around the removal of the shared zone. So with council's idea of that entire precinct is to activate it for the likes of festivals and like what we have happening this weekend with Rocky Nats and that type of thing. If that goes back to the 30, 40 kilometre an hour speed limit in those, is there restrictions of traffic that come in, like speed restrictions that come into place when those events are on, or does it remain 30 to 40 kilometres during those high visitation, I suppose, events?
So through the chair, I believe during a lot of those events it's closed off.
Yeah.
So that ability to close it off would still remain. And so it's closed off to traffic during those particular high activity events. And so in those things, I suppose there'd be no significant change. It'll just be during the day-to-day operation of it that it's at that speed limit, I suppose, reflective of what's currently happening there in the speed environment.
Yeah, thank you. Just lastly, with obviously with Rocky Nats and the River Festival, they're closed off, but there are times where it's not closed off. For example, the New Year's Eve and those types of, where huge foot traffic to the area we had for the fireworks this year, and so those roads were not closed off at that time. My concern is that we're inviting ourselves we're potentially going down a path, and I'm not going to get into the argument, come back to the question, is during those times, such as fireworks, when the roads are not closed off for a major event, even though I would still classify that as a major foot traffic event, will the speed limit of 30/40 be changed to accommodate the foot traffic?
So through the chair, no, it would remain as it currently is.
It's currently what it is currently now, and they're not sitting at the speed limit now. It's clear evidence that they don't sit at 20 kilometres now. Similar to East Street, where it's 30 kilometres, it'll be just the CBD will be 30 kilometres.
Good, through the chair, the other avenue is that a lot of those things have an event management plan, but also have a traffic management plan. That traffic management plan suggests or requires that the temporary speed restriction for that period of time can come in. So it comes back to event management.
Thank you. Councillor Rutherford?
Yep, thanks, Mr Mayor. I guess I'm a little disappointed that we lose the intent of what Quay Street was built for, you know, and I'd like to understand more why. And I'll give you this example. We have members of our community all over the place that request speed restrictions for varied reasons, because the people don't adhere to the speed limit of areas. So I'll use Wandle Shopping Precinct as a prime example. For many, many years I've had requests for the speed to be reduced there. We have centre parking, we have disabled parking in the centre, and those people have to get across the road to the shops in a precinct where people aren't obeying the speed limit. And yet we keep coming back with, no, there are standards for what a road is set for, and we abide by those standards. If a shared zone is a 20k an hour standard, why does it get priority for a change because people aren't doing the right thing when nowhere else can?
So through the chair, the issue here is that it's a shared zone. It's designed to be a shared zone under two-way traffic, and we're saying we're going to leave it as one way, 6 metres wide, and that under that circumstance it's not operating as a shared zone, and officers aren't comfortable with that, knowing that we're saying pedestrians have priority, but the speed limit we know is beyond 30 or is higher than the posted 20. So we know that in a shared zone area pedestrians have priority, but we know the speed limit is significantly higher. We're not making any changes to slow vehicles down, so the option is to then remove it as a shared zone, and it'll go back to being as a standard road with that proposed speed limit.
So basically you're saying, because I guess my frustration here is we use the term shared zone, and yet we know that there are lots of places around the region that are shared zones without necessarily using the term. I guess what you're trying to say is a shared zone gives pedestrians right of way, the Wandle precinct gives vehicles the right of way. That's
So,
what you're...
Yeah, so through the chair, the Wandle area, whilst there's a high activity, high number of pedestrians that are using that area, it's not designated as a shared zone.
The only shared zone we've had was...
Is this one, yes.
Yeah. So we haven't got others.
Yeah. So there's areas
No,
where there's...
but technically they are, they're just not called that. I mean, when people have to park in the centre of the road and get across
Well, it's not a shared zone.
wide...
That's not a shared zone. The East Street's got centre parking, it's not a shared zone.
A shared zone has a specific definition under traffic and road guidelines. That's what we're talking about, not where a place with people are parking and doing activities. This is a specific thing called a shared zone. Yep, legal. Yep.
Torum.
So then, Mr Mayor, my question from there is if shared zones are actually designated and they exist, there must be a way of policing the speed to allow them to exist in other places. What do other places do?
They can be policed. The issue we've got here is what we've got in place isn't the right design operating for a shared zone. So what we've had to say is that was our first attempt to do a shared zone in the city, but we actually haven't got to the point where we've got the infrastructure correct to make it a shared zone. So you either do that or we take it away for a while we do these other options analysis of CBD traffic movements. And that's why it's interim, because we're going to try and address this lane issue, but also look at other ways of addressing the traffic flow.
The problem with the previous recommendation was to go back to 2 ways, which I don't believe was going to be successful, and the reason then being that you'd still lose the shared zone.
Yep.
If you stayed at one way.
Yeah,
Still lose.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I understand all that and I understand the technicalities. My concern is that once the speed goes up to, and I'm assuming it'll probably be that 30k, you will still get people speeding. We have a community that has basically been trained that it is a shared zone and that the pedestrians can move around it freely. Are they at a greater risk because we've increased the speed limit and not called it a shared zone? So technically, we've done all the right things, but in practice, have we actually made it more risky for users?
I'm just going to, through the chair, right now Key Street doesn't operate like a shared zone at all.
Never. Hasn't
So
for 8 years.
if you look at the pedestrian movements, people are treating it as a road. It's, a shared zone has a very relaxed feel where people are walking through it. It's not like that. There are trucks, cars coming down. So the only time it feels like that is when it's closed. At the moment.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Through you to Stuart. Look, I support all of these, probably except for number 2, for the same reasons that Councillor Rutherford and Kirkland have raised, that it wasn't the intent of that whole development for it to be a road. We want it to be a social event space, whatever. So is there an option for, instead of doing number 2, because as Councillor Rutherford said, once you take that shared zone away and you put the speed limit back up, it's hard to undo that, it's sort of a bit confusing for anyone using it. So is there an option to trial something in Key Street, like we are going to do in Key Lane, with a removable local traffic management, a speed bump basically? I've looked at some at the back of the new art gallery, which basically just adhered to the top of the surface, but there might be a time or a couple of times in Key Street where we don't want those there. I think that was raised before that pedestrians walking over these speed bumps can trip and fall, and we don't want to create a risk there. So is there a traffic calming device, a speed bump, that can be put in Key Street? And I know they're not the most aesthetic things, but if it's going to keep that speed down to what we want it to be and keep it as a shared space, I think it's worth exploring. But then we can undo a few lugs or something and take the thing away, if it's plastic or fiberglass, whatever they are, when there's an event on there and we close the street off to pedestrians. So another one is Anzac Day. I think we have a parade down there. You don't want the old diggers trying to climb over a speed bump. But so in those special events, take the thing away and we put the bollards up that we have facilities for, and then it is a true closed off space. So is that an option that we can try and control the traffic? Because it's
probably to interject, I'll just say we need to make a decision of, is this area going to be a useful function, or are we going to use it as a road? I think that's the question we all need to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
What do you want? That's the thing.
Yeah. Well, Mr Mayor, it was designed to be an event space at a few times during the year, whether it's River Festival or New Year's Eve or Anzac Day or whatever it is, or Rocky Nats. So on those, you need the options. That if you're going to do that, we need to control the traffic speed. I agree with Councillor Rutherford. If we put the speed back up to to 30 or 40 while they'll be doing 60 or 70, I think, down there, rather than just exceeding it by a little bit. And I don't want to create more risk. Hard to undo it once we change it, that's all. But happy with the rest of it, happy to look at other options, and Mary, you and I have chatted about that, the bus lane and all sorts of other options, maybe changing the whole directionality of it. Yeah, I think it's...
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Any time we've been talking about Quay Street, I've had this discussion with Peter about the shared zone, and I agree with Councillor Rutherford. It does feel, to me, it feels like a shared zone, always. And I've parked there at night time, you come out, you only got to look one way, and people wander across the road and cars slow down. That's my experience in Quay Street. And I think I've asked you this before, Peter, if it's not a legal sign there, why did we put it there in the first place? If we're saying now that it has to come out, why did we put it there in the first place?
When we were building this whole precinct, the intent was to have that two-way and make it a shared zone. So the sign went in as part of the project.
Yeah, but we've never had it two-way, ever.
No?
We opened it up as a one-way. Yeah, okay.
And history,
It's supposed to be
As a temporary measure for construction.
Yeah.
But it's turned into the permanent measure.
Yeah.
So we're saying if it's the permanent measure,
It doesn't comply.
it's not a shared zone.
not a shared zone. And that's the decision the council need to
Yeah.
make. Do you want two ways, or do you want it to be...
No, I'm happy to remove it, but we need to put the biggest 30 k an hour sign we can find.
Yep.
That will allow us to put it there, because, to be honest, and I think a few others join me in saying that they didn't even know it was 30 till we first discussed it. I've never ever looked at the sign, to be honest. And the only time I've had any focus on shared signs is when I did a traffic management plan for our Boulder Cone Recreation Complex. So my second question is, with our signage at the northern end of Quay Street, is it going to say one way to William Street, like for the sake of tourists? Like they're coming down Quay Street, they've heard about Quay Street, and all of a sudden, you know, what signage are we going to put? Remembering that people normally don't see the first sign.
Through the chair, at the northern end, there'll be the current no entries and signs that are currently there. And there's a no right turn at Denham Street, turning onto Quay Street as it currently stands. So once drivers get down there and get on Quay Street, they'll realise it's one way, and from that William Street end, and we'll carry them north as the normal one-way road is. And we're really just reinforcing that those that come down on the Denham Street and from the north, that they can't go down Quay Street in that north-south direction.
So just through the chair, are we putting new signage at the northern end? Like, what is the new signage? What would that be saying?
So at that northern end, in terms of trying to make that island a little bit more permanent there, it'll really be like a blister island that'll have, to some extent, a bit, we're considering whether it has like a chevron that pushes them, a chevron marker sign that pushes them up into the laneway next to Criterion, that really highlights that there's no entry going into Quay Street and directing that traffic, whereas at the moment the water barrier's there and people tend to just drive around it. It'll be a little bit more defined to direct them up along the side of the Criterion with signage that's appropriate to that. But it'll still have the existing no entry signs that are there, but be supplemented with signs that are on that blister island.
Councillor Mathers.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. I've got Stuart, through the Mayor to Stuart, I've got a few questions in regards to this one, because it is a little bit interesting. You know, it's been one way for a long time now, so I suppose my confusion is, I understand the 12-month trial we're doing now is more really a trial to try to slow the speed down in the laneway and try to control the traffic there. The issue that I have is, you know, I use that quite often myself, very regularly. I think I've already told a story. You know, the trucks parked to one side. I've seen young people who aren't confident driving who have actually reversed up because and waited because they couldn't get past. I was there on Friday, and there was a queue of 8 cars right down to the front of the criterion because the delivery truck had stopped in the middle of the road. They hadn't pulled off to one side. So my concern is putting the traffic, the speed humps there might slow it down, but it's not going to stop the congestion and the backup with, you know, all the trucks that are unloading from. So the issue that I have with that is, you know, I understand this is a 12-month trial, but we're looking at spending about $20,000 on a 12-month trial when it's already been like that for years anyhow. You know, I think it's about $12,000 for a removable traffic island. Do we really need to spend that money if there's already a bollard there? You know, why do we need to spend $12,000 if it's just a 12-month trial? I understand why we need to spend some money on the speed humps, because we're trying to help the local residents out there about what's happening within that area. It's the same as even right down to the shared zone. It's been a shared zone for this long now. If this is a 12-month trial, why do we need to remove the shared zone for the 12-month trial? It's already been a shared zone one way for 5-6 years. So they're sort of my concerns, and I suppose, you know, my question is, do we need to spend that money, or why do we need that spend the money on the temporary island when there's already a barrier there that I see that we've put a cover over it to make it look a little bit better?
So through the chair, with the island, it was what had come from the business owners. So very many of them, I think, had complained about the look of that water-filled barrier and the effectiveness of it. So that was where the request to make something a little bit more permanent, I suppose, that highlights that you can't go through there rather than a barrier that they tend to drive around. I note that it looks a little bit more attractive now that there's been a cover put over it for Rocky Nuts. That's predominantly where that item had come from. The businesses had raised it and several of them had raised it, and I think they might have raised it in the meeting with councillors at the start of the year, that was a concern for them about how it detracting from the overall look of Quay Street. So that's why that had landed in there. And yes, it would formalise that movement a little bit more, but noting, yes, it is for temporary, as a trial period until a decision's made from council.
Thanks for that. Mr Mayor, just one more question, if that's okay. Yes, Stuart, if I cast my mind back to the last time this came to the table, I think, Peter, when you did the presentation, I think it was figures of around, I think it was about, for us to make it full-time one way, it was going to take it to 2 lanes the way it's supposed to be. I think it was about $40,000 odd, rings a bell to me, to do something with the traffic island down the end at William Street, to do a couple of things like that for it to be, to go to the 2-way. But there was going to be a lot more expense in regards to it being left as one way, because we had to lose the shared zone, we had to make quite a few changes to traffic. Is that correct?
Traffic calming solutions.
Yeah, traffic calming. So if it, if we do the trial and we decide, okay, it's going to stay one way, which is, if that's what people want, that's what we do. But we've just got to look at what the expenses are as well.
I mean, the key, through the chair, the key thing is what's triggering us to change now is we went and did a traffic count and established the actual speed that's occurring there. So that's what triggered that said we better do something about this.
Councillor, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a couple of things. Firstly, the question was, within the recommendations, why a dot point to investigate further options and implications of changing the direction of Quay Lane wasn't included, because I think that was something that was sort of coming up. A lot of people are saying that would make a difference. I know it's in the report, but I would like to see that explored as well, so that from instead of Quay Lane operating between Fitzroy and Denham north-south, operate south-north, and that would ease even the loudest and angriest of the businesses a lot of their concerns. So that was one, and I was just querying why further investigation was not put into that.
So through the chair, that's one of the, I suppose, further configurations that are going to be looked at as part of that work. So
shouldn't we have that in the resolution as well? Because
well, there's a range of options, councillor. So we broadly covered it, I suppose, on options and implications of different configurations, rather than individually stating all the options that might be looked at.
Just it'd be good to have Key Lane in.
It's got there, councillor, in the number one.
It's Key Street, not.
Well, that would.
Yeah, the wider implications, councillor, will be
Change
changes
Key
to the
Street
laneway.
to lane.
Yeah. Second one is that I believe that speed is a policing matter as well. You know, when we have those high problems on Mount Archer, we have those cycles. Queensland Police have been very, very good, and they're sort of prosecuting those that go over the speed limit. Maybe it's sort of something that we need to raise, that, you know, nothing spreads faster than people getting quite a number of tickets. And we have a really good spell on Mount Archer, Pilbeam Drive, for about 3-4 months, and then the cycle goes again. But that is another area that I think that we should be, if we've identified that people are speeding, we should be sort of talking with Queensland Police as well for that. And the last area there is I can't support Part 2 removing that shared zone. We've created a really good culture. It was always that vision, and I think that they should always be looking at that shared zone. That's something that we've got unique to the city.
Yeah,
Thank
okay,
you, Mr.
councillor, you can move an alternate recommendation if that's not supported by the table. Councillor Kirkland and then Councillor Wickerson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Stuart, I'm fairly confident that I know the answer to this, but I still want to ask it again. So, when we go two-way, we become compliant to being a shared zone, because two-way traffic would significantly slow down just in its mechanism and the way of people stopping and parking their vehicles and that sort of thing. That it would also include increased visitation and accessibility from both ends, as well as alleviating can't find a park, where do I go now type questions, and potentially even remove that key lane traffic.
Have you got a question, councillor?
My question is that correct? Is that correct?
That is still an option, yes, that it would, and that's officers' recommendation previously, that yes, two-way traffic would facilitate slower speeds, remove the volumes on the laneway.
So the shared zone could stay if it was two-way traffic,
Yes.
because that's compliant.
Yes.
That's what I thought, just clearing it up.
No, that's right. It's always been councillor. It hadn't been any difference. It was just that the table wasn't, I read the table and they weren't sure to go back to two ways. They liked it the one way, and the public like it one way. That's the difference that we're feeling here. It's, yeah, and where we've got to work our way through. Councillor.
Just what shared zones are very slow traffic, so we're talking 10 kilometres.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, my mind goes to the likes of the Strand in Townsville, which is two-way, and I don't know if it's a shared zone designated or not.
And what
but
speeds are they doing there,
it's
councillor?
got that feel, yeah.
What
So
speed do they do there?
in the Strand in
Yeah, what
Townsville.
speed do they do there?
Yes, I just said, they're all low speeds, yeah.
Ah, right. Okay. Right, thank you. Councillor Wickerson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. A question for you to Stuart. With point one, is there a time frame for that? Like these other options that we're going to look at, just saying if it's in the short term, do we need to do any other trials? Because it may come back and who knows, it might be two-way or some other option we're looking at. So do we know how long that exploring further options process might take?
It's the million-dollar question, councillor. I'll defer to Peter.
Look, the amount of options that has been identified in the various meetings is quite substantial. So that's one of the reasons why we said let's do this for 12 months while we go and have a good look at it. So it's not a quick...
Yeah. So 12 months, easy.
That's why we picked that up.
Yeah. Well, just following on from that, because the meetings that I think Mayor and I have had with the consortium of business owners there, and just to qualify that, it's not just their road, other users too. So while the majority of those people that actually have businesses in Key Street may generally strongly want it to be back to two-way, I've heard from other people that aren't businesses down there and they're quite happy how it is at the moment. So it's not just their road, but can we keep in touch with those, at least those stronger stakeholders because at the moment they feel like they're not being quite informed. They were a bit surprised with the cover over the thing, and they were a bit sarcastic about that, but just to keep in touch with them and keep them in the loop on how things are proceeding.
Yes, Councillor, we'll work on communications in the cohort that businesses in that location.
Okay. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Rutherford.
Mr Mayor, I'm just wondering, are there any other options the officers can think of that would allow us still to have the shared zone there? I'm a little reluctant to remove dot point 2 because the officer's recommendation has the backing of
Relevant standards and...
of standards and everything else. So it would be very game of us to remove that, giving...
Councillor, you've got two choices. You can, if you want the shared zone there, you've got to go to two ways. So happy to, Councillor, to move that resolution to do that. So if within that, we can't have a shared zone without going back.
Is there only two choices?
There's
That's
two
what I'm
choices.
asking.
That's what
I
I'm
don't
saying.
know. I mean, speed humps would be another choice.
Sorry, through the chair, it's if you don't want to do anything on Key Street, the options are, and that was previously put forward, is leave it as is and don't do anything. The options are two-way, or we remove it as a shared zone. So if we want to implement LATM treatments and that, which we've previously brought forward to the table as options, and that's what we can come back with and look at, but that has extensive amounts of money associated with those. We can do that, and it can be one way in a shared zone, but in the interim period, if we're going to do nothing at all, it's two-way or we remove the shared zone. Because of the design associated with that shared zone was for two-way traffic, and that's what that's been based off. So we remove that out, and we've got a 6 metre wide one-way lane. Something has to be done to manage that speed environment a little bit better.
So here's a left field question. If we called it a car park, what would happen? If the whole street was a car park, what would happen then?
Through the chair,
I'm not sure I know how to answer that.
Through the chair, it's a gazetted road.
It's a road.
We have to close the road
Yeah.
to have it as a car park,
Yeah,
which
we'd
means
have to close the
property
road.
access and
You
that
could shut
would
it
be
down to cars and just make it full of
impacted.
foot traffic, make it a mall.
Well,
The other-
no, we need it for parking, but if it's a car park, not a gazetted road, what happens then?
It serves as the legal point of access for several properties, so they would now have no legal point of access if we said the road was a car park. There'd be some wider implications.
They
They need a legal access, don't
they don't have access from Key Lane?
No, not all of them. Some have access purely off Key Street. And the ability to enforce a speed limit in a car park is next
Nil.
to none. So it wouldn't be gazetted as a road. So all the current rights and responsibilities that council have as a road authority with regards to approvals of footpaths and dining in footpaths and local laws and utilities, and that would fall away if we weren't going to call it a road. So there's some wider implications, I suppose, on doing that. Whilst I understand the intent, there's some more far-reaching implications of doing that.
So one more question, Mr Mayor, if I can. The dream was always that we would have alfresco dining along there and, in years to come, hopefully not too far. What speed limit means that you have to put bollards and everything up to allow that to happen?
I'll have to take that one on notice, councillor, but I believe under a low speed, under 30 kilometres, that there may not be a requirement to bollard things off. I'd have to take that on notice, councillor.
Through the chair, I don't believe you would need bollards.
No.
The 30K is called high active transport user area, so I think that qualifies for, it's a low speed. Whereas the one we're talking about is effectively that next step, which is really low, called shared zone. So I think either will allow you to do your alfresco.
With the clearances because there's so much on-street parking that provides us, but in the car park, the garden beds that are there, there's a fair bit of separation between any on-street dining and, and the through moving traffic.
Could we please just double check that so we know?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's the difference between 30 Ks or 40 Ks, and 40 Ks stops us from having alfresco dining,
Yeah, I don't know where the 40
Yeah.
Ks come from. I just
in
envisioned
the
that it'd be
report.
30 Ks, the same as the CBD.
it's in the
E
report.
Street CBD.
Yeah, make it so.
Make it a CBD location, 30 K. Councillor Mathers?
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. Just going back to my point, you know, one of my major concerns, no matter what we do with this isn't going to fix the congestion that we've got in Key Lane and the trucks pulling up delivery trucks. And we can't stop the delivery trucks, they need to go there for
Councillor, have you got a question?
Okay, yep, sorry. So my question is, Mr Mayor, are we looking at this the wrong way? It's been one way for about 5 or 6 years. We're looking at spending 20 grand for a 12 months trial while we assess what else we can do. Should we not maybe go back the other way and open it to 2 ways as a 12 months trial to see how that goes while we're assessing the way the traffic management plan could go, and we don't have to spend $20,000?
Yeah, I'm hoping that you save $20,000, but you're going to interfere with the public. And the reason once you make a decision is the decision you're going to have is a permanent one. You either make it now and say going back to 2 ways, or you make it now and say it's 1 way. One or the other,
And Mr Mayor, I hear what you're saying, but the way I feel is that the fact we're putting a traffic
we're
hole...
getting into debate, Councillor. I think, is there a question?
Okay.
Is there a question?
Yeah, the question is, are we looking at it the wrong way? Why don't we, should we not just put it back to 2 ways as a trial, see what the public think about it for 12 months, save this public $20,000, and we can see how it operates as a 2-way area, and we keep our shared zone.
Councillor Smith?
So if we're ready, I'd like to move the recommendation.
You'll move the recommendation. We have a seconder. Councillor Wickerson. Speakers for the motion? Speakers against? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those opposed? You wish to record your votes against? Councillor Kirkland and Councillor Mathers recorded their votes against the motion. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to the next item. Thanks, Stu, for that report. 10.4, the Parkhouse Road Strategy. Who's got this one? David Hood. Okay, David, thank you.
Good morning, Mr Mayor, councillors and fellow officers. This report's probably over a large, wide area, which you may, well, most probably familiar with, but I'll just go through some key points in the report and some of the work, the background to the work that we've done in presenting this report to you today. The area is zoned for residential development. It's predominantly, and some of this goes back quite a number of years to probably around the 2005 mark, where Edenbrook made approaches to council to have that land subdivided, and so the strategy in itself really goes back to those early days, where in the approval of that development, traffic that was generated from the Edenbrook development was planned to what was then William Palfrey Road, it's now Edenbrook Drive, was planned to use Edenbrook Drive to the west. So they've started on the western end of the Edenbrook area. That traffic was to move westward, then down Belmont Road to the intersection of Alexandra Street at Belmont Road and Birkbeck Drive. So that was probably the start of the development in the area. Since that time, Riverside Waters has come along, wherein there's about 200 something lots approved for development there. So that traffic will use Belmont Road to the same you know, to the south as well, down to Alexandra, Birkbeck, Belmont. Thanks, Linda. There's a plan here. It probably doesn't show the full extent, but the Edenbrook Drive that I was mentioning is on the left-hand side and north's off to the left. There's an area here that was an existing rural res type development, so there's a number of lots in there that use Belmont Road. So all of the traffic in the first instance really gravitates using what is now Edenbrook Drive and Belmont Road down to the intersection here at Belmont Road, Alexandra Street, Birkbeck Drive. So the focus of the report is twofold. Council's LGIP has long time ago identified that intersection as part of its trunk infrastructure works, and it's listed in Council's planning scheme in the LGIP to be upgraded at a point in time. So this report is really looking at in a level of detail around the development that has occurred since planning assumptions were put together and subsequently amended to take into account the likes of the developments that have come on board, i.e. Riverside Waters, and there's the Mass, what is now the Mass site, further to the east of the McLaughlin Street corridor, which is just shown at the top of the plan there. So on the other side of McLaughlin Street, all the way out to Yamba Road and north of William Palfrey Road, as I'm sure you're well aware. In working through this, probably the first step to consider was we've looked at that entire area, so Riverside Waters, Edenbrook, you know, the full development of Edenbrook, the full-scale development of the Mass site. So there's Council's planning assumptions and planning scheme looks at an interim arrangement for interim up to the end of the current life of the planning scheme, and then beyond that as well. So in configuring the works that we're presenting today, we've considered the full ultimate development and the likely trip distributions from that development. And I'll just go through some of those key things. They are highlighted in the report, but it might be easier just to explain it as well. So the two, I've just got to catch my train of thought. What the report proposes is we really need, what do these things look like? What does the infrastructure need to be? And timing, and the magic budget amount. So the strategy was to use Council's road network basically to its ultimate capacity before we need this work to be done. So I mean, it's been identified some many years ago, but you know, time is ticking, and lots are continuing to be developed and contributing traffic to the network. So we looked at timing for the roundabout here, so that's what this report presents, and furthermore the link up to the Edenbrook Drive connection. Now there's other work to be presented at a later date for the eastward connection there, but this work is around the roundabout and the link. So let me just check. In the report, there's some timing requirements, and if I can just probably move to the Recommendation, we'll go through the plans.
No. Yeah, probably just, David, we might just go to questions from councillors if
Yep,
there's
sure.
anything there with the detail of it. Probably if we go back to that previous image, I had one to start with, and it's just up in the top left-hand section of that road. It steps out of the corridor or the natural easement going to the left to the north, then comes back over into an area. I'm just curious, do we own that land where that diversion occurs to link back into Edenbrook Drive?
Back to the Edenbrook, that's road reserve.
Just as you can see the blue lines there where the road reserve continue to the north, but then it steps out and then joins back up to. It's just a funny anomaly that it seems to be stepping outside of the road reserve.
That land's now dedicated as road reserve.
As road reserve.
So
okay.
as part of the Edenbrook development works and through the development process, that where that realignment around the hill there is, that's road reserve, yeah.
Is that to slow the traffic down? I'm just curious why it seems to just...
No, it's just to save cutting through the hill. Sorry, Mr Mayor.
There's a hill there, is there?
Yeah, through you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Righto. Well, that answered it. I was just looking at that from the aerial. I wasn't sure why it was heading that location. So I've got a couple other lights on there. I'll go to those. Councillor Kirkland and Councillor Wickerson. Councillor Kirkland.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks so much, team, for this presentation. It's and it is, I'm sure, to the residents that are out in these areas, good news, given that in the last month there's been a couple of nasty accidents coming along that Belmont Road, right where that roundabout is actually, a serious one there, and further along back into town through Alexandra Extended. So it's a great project. My question to you is, does it marry in nicely with the existing, hopefully not going to change, design for the ring road? Or is it complementing or is it conflicting with the ring road?
Through you, Mr Mayor, we've taken
That's
all
a
of...
pretty difficult question, that
Yeah,
one.
I know.
I just say it's depending whether you support the ring road or not, Councillor. I'd say that'd be the answer to that question. The at-grade, the grade separated crossing along Alexandra Street is still part of that ring road, which is separate to...
It's above grade though now, isn't it?
So, Mr Mayor, the officers have regular meetings with DTMR. They're aware of this as one of our strategies. DTMR still probably need to provide us some plans, but they've got this information available to them. So yes, they have to be complementary now.
So we're going with complementary too? Okay.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yeah, we're 100% aware of what the concept ring road works were. The final detail is still being worked through, so we will get a final set of plans at a time. But the extent of the works here don't conflict with the ring road works to the best of our knowledge at this time.
I think that my thought process was at $13.5 million, we don't want to go building something that we've got to rip up again because it conflicts with the ring road, you know? So that was my premise for the question. Thank you.
Councillor Wickerson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Through you, a couple of questions. First one, it seems a bit odd, that top left-hand corner, the T intersection there, compared to the roundabout down the bottom right. So do the traffic flows, or even anticipated traffic flows going on in the future as those areas get further developed, are the traffic numbers that different that T intersection would work as efficiently? I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but I would have thought there's going to be nearly equally as much traffic going down Edenbrook Drive and trying to get onto the new extension through as would be at Birkbeck Drive and Belmont Road down the bottom.
Through you, Mr Mayor, that detail there is, That's really the only connection that is, it's part of an existing development. So that connection is for, in particular, the Edenbrook development. We're still working with the proponents of the other sites to the east, with connections to that Alexandra Street. So that, I mean, as a connection in a T intersection configuration for the near term, that's fine.
And related to that a little bit, at the moment, my recollection is that Edenbrook Drive, if you follow that through, goes right through to the highway. It's not a terribly well-formed road, but it seems to be a bit used. It's either traffic down there. There's no exit off that extension through for people to keep using that road through to Parkhurst part of the highway.
Well, that's the Mass Group project where they're trying to, they're working with QR to look at an at-grade rail crossing back out at Olive Street.
Yeah. Okay.
Back into the Parkhurst area, Councillor.
Yeah, okay. And the final question is, the land at the beginning there where the reservoir is state land, I believe. Are we liaising with the right agencies there about what their future plans might be for that lot? I know it's not a diversionary centre, but it's...
We've already acquired the land.
We have?
Yeah, we've done that years ago.
The whole...
No, the corridor.
That corridor through?
Yep.
Okay.
Because it's been on the cards. Once that land started to develop, there was always a link. You needed to go back to Alexandra Street, and this is that link to save that pressure on to Belmont Road, is to come through there and take that load off, so to speak. But there's always the intention to have the highway connection as well into Parkhurst. So you'll have an east-west exit out of that area.
So, Mr Mayor, in general, what's been proposed here is in line with what the local government infrastructure plan was when it was adopted by council some years ago. This is just taking it to the next level as we've got development in that area occurring, and it's putting a lot of road pressure on our road network. And no doubt in the near future, Martin and the team will be bringing ones for the water and the sewage through as well to actually take it through to the next stage of development, so we can actually get it into our budget to actually start to build some of this stuff. So generally speaking, where a LiDAR is onto the top of that page, there will be a connection through that will connect over whenever they can get some traction from QR in relation to the rail crossing for that development as well. So it'll all be connected there.
So probably my question though, Evan, would be in relation to that trunk infrastructure. We're not going to put road down and then have to pull it up to put trunk infrastructure, sewage and water into those.
No, Mr Mayor, no, that's not our intention straight up to do that. Yeah. Everything's planned out now.
Yep.
You know, we do have a mass coming through. They've indicated they may change their layout slightly, so the officers are working closely with them as well to make sure that we measure twice, cut once.
That's it. Righto, thank you. Councillor Latcham.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a question, maybe I've lost it. Birkbeck Drive, it's not that busy. From the times I've been out there, maybe because it's not properly formed down towards the McLaughlin Street end. But I would have thought it was easier and less expense to just go Birkbeck Drive and do a turn onto McLaughlin down there in that corner. The road's already there. It wouldn't have taken much, surely, to make that the main road rather than adding another road. Am I missing something? What's the reason for the extra road?
Getting that traffic, that growth to the north, away from the industrial area and onto Alexandra.
Okay, so it separates the two. Okay, but you can put a timber fence up and that would do the same.
Not really for amenity of a subdivision like this.
Thank you.
Councillor Kirkland.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I did have another question, which was, given the amount of lots that have been released and the traffic flows and everything that are happening now, are we behind schedule in the delivery of this, or are we on target? When's the actual date that you're hoping to put this forward for start?
I'd say we're on, through the chair, we're actually probably on time. I probably would like to see it a little bit sooner. It really depends on when Mass Group comes on board, or When MAS find out what they have to build at the crossroad of the rail crossing, they may have to come down here to this section here to actually start some of their development. So at that point in time, that would trigger this. And also Edenbrook is reaching, it's got you say it, Mark, there's a number of lots it's got that actually triggers this.
934.
Necessarily just purely MAS group, it's also development within Edenbrook and within Riverside, which is loading up Belmont Road. Okay, so when we get a certain trigger lot, we definitely need the second, whether it comes from the Leida site or Edenbrook site or Riverside. I think it's 450 lots development, something around those. So at the moment, budget-wise, we're looking at that roundabout in about 24, 25. So we would start doing detailed design and probably early works, service relocations maybe next financial year. And we would look at the big job, the big road deviation, directly after that, following straight on from that roundabout, so into 25, 26, you'll be looking at that road.
Again, we've got a housing bottleneck, and this is needed. It's got part of that.
100%, Mr Mayor. It's absolutely needed, definitely needed. A lot of families and safety that's needed there. My question, again, then through you, Mr Mayor, to Martin, would be what is that expected, that design component, budget-wise, expected to be? Is it already accounted for, or is it new? Am I allowed to ask that?
Long-term financial
Yeah.
plan.
Partially, it's in the 10-year long-term financial forecast, and it's currently being worked through the draft budgets for your consideration coming up the next few months. You'll notice in the actual report that we have a budget figure of 3.4 million on the roundabout. Currently we've got 2.1 in the budget, and I think from memory it was 13.4 for the major road, of which we've got about 9 or 9.5 currently sitting in the budget.
And that was in 2022 dollars though, wasn't it?
That's right, but this, I suppose, part of this increase in cost is reflecting what we're finding with our current increased costs across the whole industry of road construction. So yes, those original budget figures were tied back to the original LGIP figures done in about 2019, and they were only sort of indexed up, but now we're finding the indexing is not keeping up with the road construction costs.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, councillors? If not, seek a mover and a seconder with that report. Councillor Smith as the portfolio chair, happy to have Councillor Kirkland second. Put that, those in favour, those opposed, motion's carried unanimously. We'll move on to the item 10.5, the walking and cycling strategy pathway hierarchy and prioritisation framework. Stuart, would you like to? Thanks, Stuart.
So you may recall last year we had a briefing session with Council regarding unsolicited appointments. Rightio. So as you recall, at the end of last year we had a briefing session with Council where we worked through some of these particular items. This report seeks to bring those back to the table. In the walking and cycling strategy that Council had adopted, there's several short-term actions that officers have been working on, and they're listed there in the report, but predominantly around developing a pathway hierarchy to determine function and design of the provisions for different types of pathways. And so the attachment there has a hierarchy that's been classified similarly to a road hierarchy into, an order of principal network down to a local route. Where that differs from road hierarchy, I suppose, is the intent around that and where pedestrians are going rather than necessarily aligning particularly exactly with the road network. In addition to that, we've applied that over the Rockhampton, Gracemere and Mount Morgan networks, reflecting where some of those movement type functions occur. So that's moving from place to place, going from, like in residential areas to work and, destination to destination. and the maps of those are included in the attachment. In addition to that, we've acknowledged that movement forms one part of the network, so moving from place to place, but there's also a need for footpath infrastructure within proximity to some of these key activity centres. So activity centres are areas of high pedestrian and cyclist activity, schools, shopping centres, hospitals and the like. Initially, the focus included in this has been placed on schools and aged care facilities, whilst also including connections to some of our major parks and recreation facilities. So the reason focus has been on those is that they were specifically mentioned within the walking and cycling strategy because of the number of vulnerable road users associated with them. So a range of maps, I suppose, were brought to the table highlighting some of those areas. The next step was to look at trying to deliver a program of work. So the budget, obviously the allocations in that report are subject to the current budget process. What's shown there is just a reflection of the endorsed footpath asset management plan, but we're noting that they'd be subject to change to that capital program. But essentially the intent of that was to highlight that over the next 10 years it was around $7 million and the cost of the identified projects is $37 million. So in order to understand what we do first and how we tackle that, we've come up with a prioritisation framework, and that's included in the attached report and was presented to raise with council in that briefing session previously. The criteria that we've used to try and, or we're proposing to use to prioritise are around strategic alignment, demand, connectivity, network enhancement and safety, and that's included in the report and as an attachment there. These, as I said, were brought to a briefing session end of November. There's a range of feedback that we received from councillors, so thank you for that. And those have been included there in the report. I won't necessarily go into the extent of all of those, but I highlight that that's the changes that have been made based on that consultation. So the intent of this, I suppose, now that we've got those maps, we're seeking endorsement of that and the framework, which will now allow us to then go in to try and develop a prioritised program for footpath infrastructure moving forward. So happy to take any questions from the table.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Councillor Wickerson and Councillor Rutherford.
Yep. Thanks, Mr Mayor. Through you to Stuart. Stuart, is this a living document that we can periodically add to? A point that I make, Mayor, you and I and Councillor Mathers looked at an amazing new development in Glencoe Street the other day with independent living for 12 plus people. The connection, which is only short, it might be 50, 100 metres through to Upper Dawson Road where there's a good network of pathways, isn't there. Obviously not on this list because it wasn't built when we did this. So the question is there an opportunity to periodically add new local routes to it or higher priority as they arise?
It's living. I suppose we can. It'll add more projects to the list, I suppose, as we go along. But periodically throughout this, 10-year program, I suppose it can be looked at and periodically reviewed to do that. Usually, sometimes it's left to the end of the 10 years to review. However, if council's intends to do that sooner, we can.
Yeah, and if there's grant funding that becomes available for those types of projects that potentially as they come online that are not there, having a living document, you'll be able to do that because I think there was 8 residents in that facility and very high needs and access to amenities would be something there that's required to give them that level of independence. So the distance wasn't great, but it was one that we just would need to fund in the years to come.
And Mayor, just a follow-up question. I'm just wondering what the process would be. What's the best way to inject those new opportunities in as they arise? Bring it back to the table or email to the GM? What's the best way to feed that information in?
You'd have to work, if I put through the chair, you'd have to work your way through the framework because that prioritisation framework is really your policy position.
Yeah.
And so you work your way through that one, and that would be just generally through the offices.
It's just,
for
to me, it's just a
consideration.
customer request that you're lodging that says that I've identified this footpath. We'll check whether we may have it already from another point of view, and we need to look at how often we review. I accept you don't leave it 10 years, but how often do we review the program? Right now, council has a 2-year adopted program, which we haven't completed yet, fully funded. So we will bring that back to council also to show what we've done off that 2-year program, and this one will be the next one that will plug on after that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Latcham, then Councillor Rutherford. Or Councillor Rutherford, then Councillor Latcham.
I'll make it very quick, if I may. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Stuart, $12,500, how many metres does that get you in a year?
So through the chair, we previously raised that's for curb ramp works, that 12,500, so it was just for a series of curb ramps, replacement or improvements there, so it wasn't particularly related to length of footpath, it was for a series of curb ramps there, so that's why it's such a small allocation.
Okay. I guess we'll talk about the
understanding,
budget.
Councillor, when we were going through our budget, there was over $13 million worth of pathways that have been delivered through the state government that have been...
Yeah, and that was appreciated, Mr Mayor.
Increasing our pathway network.
I think the community wants more footpaths. It goes to livability of a region. So, and this is sadly
Council, we've come a
missing.
long way from my time on council. There's no money for footpaths. So,
Yep.
yeah, I think the network's there, and working through programs like this, it's starting to chip away at that need for the community.
And Mr Mayor, if I may, $7 million out of 35, 20% over 10 years. That seems largely inadequate.
Yes, Councillor, and we've got a $60 million stormwater network one that's unfunded as well. It's just as impacting people with flooding into their houses as well. So you weigh up where your priorities are and how much budget we've got.
Yeah. Okay. I guess
Can't do everything. That's the thing. It's a process there of trying to do what we can with what we've got.
Yeah. Okay. I guess it'll be discussed in budget. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Rutherford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I've got a couple, if
Yep.
you don't mind. And I guess, Stuart, a couple of things just jumped out to me, and that was the Jardine Street, Western Street debate, and we kept rocking back and forward over that one. My takeaway from the Cycling Network meeting that we had was the preference was actually Jardine Street, not Western Street. And I think it came down to the fact that it was felt that a lot of the students from Crescent Lagoon School would probably walk Jardine Street and then feed either way from Jardine Street. So I guess all I'm saying is my takeaway from that meeting is different from what is listed here. Did you have something different?
Yeah, so through the chair, I suppose the inclusion in here is that they're both there. The only change there, Councillor Rutherford, was that Western Street was the preference from the cycling community for shared facilities down there for the PCN, so the Principal Cycle Network. So that's why that's that little bit wider standard. But we'd have said there's relevance in keeping both of them because they have those, there is that catchment that it draws to both of those. So the Western Street one is that higher standard because it's encapsulating cyclists as well. So that was the only reason for that change.
All right, thank you. I misunderstood that one.
Yeah.
The one that I'm really concerned about, and I'm just wondering if you can tell me how the chosen route ends up higher. The the Morgan Street link.
Yep.
Now, I fully believe that D Street is more important, and yet Morgan Street has still come up higher. Can you tell me what in the framework is driving Morgan Street ahead of D Street?
So through the chair, it's not necessarily ahead, it's more that both remain there. So both of them have the same level of standard associated with them. The Morgan Street is more aligned to Morgan Street being the higher order road, but the D Street one is still represented as being associated with that particular activity centre. So both are still shown in that space, and they're both to a similar standard on the plans, I believe.
I didn't see D Street included at all, and that part of Morgan Street I would debate is a higher order road. The most of the traffic and everything else finishes pretty much at Anzac Park. From that point down Morgan Street really is not higher order than D Street. D Street, you've got the high school at one end, and then you've got the Boyd Park precinct, which has got we'll have the new swimming pool, the skate park, childhood centre, green shed, and then a residential area and Newman Oval.
Yep.
So it is by far a much more used
Yep.
route than the one that's been chosen.
Yep. And through the chair, we took that point on. Councillor, in the activity, in the attachment 4, the combined pathways maps, they show both the activity centre and the hierarchy maps. So you'll actually see that the footpath on Morgan Street's already been built. There's an existing one that's there prior to this, and then it's highlighting that on D Street, between Central Street down to Thompson Avenue, that we're reflecting the need for footpath along there to connect along the frontage of the school down to that facility as you'd previously described. So it's shown there as being a proposed footpath in that.
Sorry, which attachment are you?
So that's number 4.
The pink one?
So, yeah, so on this one here, we can, oh, it's not working. So you can see there, that black bit there is D Street, reflecting the connection down there from east down to Thompson Avenue. So the black bit that's proposed there is that activity centre footpath network that we're proposing as part of this works.
So, sorry, what's the difference between the pink
So pink is
board
existing.
and the green and...
So because they
So
were...
the black line,
Yep.
so I guess I don't know how that black line fits in when the other maps have got light green, dark green, and they're the proposed...
Yeah. So on the next attachment, they're all in together. So we split them out because it was just too confusing. There's lines going everywhere. So the next map's here. So this next one here shows the combination of existing, the hierarchy, and the proposed activity centres. But there's a lot going on there. But you can see there that the pink is all that's currently constructed. And then you can see that the yellow underneath that, Morgan Street, is underlying the hierarchy. But we're highlighting that that's already been built. And then you can see the black there, that's the activity centre that relates to those purposes that you raised with us at that workshop, Councillor, that briefing session that highlight the need that there's that missing link along there on D Street, between East Street and down to Thompson Avenue. And so that will be the project, the projects that are here where there's no existing will be forming into that ultimate program that's prioritised.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
No, that's all right.
For explaining that.
Yeah, it was a bit hard because there's
Yep.
maps on maps on maps. So, yeah, that one there shows sort of all the proposed works. Yep.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr.
Thanks, Councillor Rutherford. Okay, councillors, no further questions. Could I seek a mover and a second with regards to the officer's report? Move Councillor Smith, seconded Councillor Fisher. Put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to the end of our items on the agenda today. Can I thank the officers for their reports and presentations? Thank councillors for your involvement in questions and resolutions. And thank you, Linda. I'll close the meeting.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine.